folks. Welcome back to the Food for the Faithful channel with me, your reluctant prophet. Reluctant today because of how extremely dire the prevailing situation is. I seek to operate this channel as an apologist for Christian ethics, epistemology, and ontology. When horrendous things happen, such as happened this past weekend, and the ongoing war in Israel, I'm reminded of the fact that the entire foundation for those three things of our ethics, epistemology, and ontology began in Israel. The belief in one God, the moral rectitude of the law that descended from Sinai, the fact that the scriptures refer to us as shoots grafted into a vine that we frankly weren't a part of. I'll read from Romans 11:13 to 24. Now I'm speaking to you Gentiles. Inasmuch then as I am apostle to the Gentiles, I magnify my ministry, in order somehow to make my fellow Jews jealous, thus have some of them. For if their rejection means the reconciliation of the world, what will the accepted mean but life from the dead? If the dough offered as first fruits is holy, so is the whole lump. And if the root is holy, so are the branches. But if some of the branches were torn off, and you, although a wild olive shoot, were grafted in amongst the others, and now share in the nourishing root of the olive tree, do not be arrogant toward the branches. If you are, remember, it is not you who support the root, but the root who supports you. The entire underpinning of Western society exists in Israel. There is no West without Israel. I want to remind you that if there's a war going on in Israel today, because we are the new Israel, there's a war going on in the heavenly places. So today I want to talk about the nature of that war and why we are where we are, and why some of our politicians and our academics are sympathizing with Hamas in the face of what is nothing short of a brutal Holocaust, beheading babies, raping women in front of their dead husbands. So we need to, there is no one-size-fits-all solution for any problem. We need to understand the depths of the moral and philosophical corruption and perversion of what we once believed. So I'm going to go back in time a little bit to when I was in Norway and what I saw there. I think it's fair to say that Scandinavia was emerging at that time as a truly post-Christian nation, a nation where socialism had replaced Christianity, if it ever did really take hold, because Scandinavia was the last part of Western Europe to be Christianized, and there was always an underlying tenor of paganism that remained alive there. It's even in their names. They still name the days of the week and their children after their pagan gods. So in Norway, I began to wake up. They have a thing called janteloven, which is basically, if the nail sticks up, you need to pound it down. So obviously, if you're a hammer then everything becomes a nail. I need you to understand that, because that is the key to understanding what is driving the current prevalent ideological possession. I saw my wife's government creating issue after issue, only to emerge as the only ones who could solve it. Yendeloven, of course, was the first clue that I had as to why they were doing it, this need for absolute societal conformity. But then I was blessed enough to find a book written by a friend of mine, a man who I now call my friend, Michael Claire-Neeson, and it's a book entitled Manipulism and the Weapon of Guilt. I'll read the foreword. Manipulism and the Weapon of Guilt, Collectivism Exposed is the utmost controversial expose and carefully detailed description of the awful emotional mind games that facilitate communism, socialism, fascism, and social liberalism known as collectivism. The book exposes Denmark, the supposed happiest nation on earth, for what it truly is: collectivism's biggest propaganda hoax. Danish author Michael Claire-Neeson tells the hidden facts and realities of life in Denmark's democratic socialism that you never wanted to know. That helped. I know that my inability to accept the cognitive dissonance that was required to live in such societies as a result of my own neurosis, of my own emotional failings, perhaps even mental illness. So I knew that although Michael had really delved deeply into it, that there still had to be some other philosophical underpinning to it. In 2014, I can remember where I was standing when I asked my wife this question. Please tell me what this is. Give me your best guess as to what it is. My wife's formal education was in the military. She's one of the first two women to have graduated from Norwegian Naval Academy in Bergen, Norway, out on the west coast. But after she had resigned her commission and her children had grown, she went back and worked for the Defense Department. But she also decided that she'd take a degree in art history and philosophy at the University of Oslo. And even in spite of her academic qualifications from the military, she was still required to do introductory courses for whatever reason. A reason that, of course, only a socialist can explain. When she was taking her introductory courses, she learned about the Frankfurt School and its remaking of the Hegelian dialectic that Marx and Engels employed to create dialectical materialism. So it had reinvented communism to suit intersectional oppression. Instead of the proletariat versus the bourgeoisie, I know I have repeated this ad infinitum, but they had replaced the proletariat versus the bourgeoisie with the intersectionally oppressed against white patriarchal tyranny itself, which is society. So this was my first introduction to what James Lindsay refers to as the operating system of leftism, which includes, of course, Nazis, fascists, commies, and postmodernists, and the prevailing woke ideology that has permeated modern culture. The dialectic provides a one-size-fits-all solution to multivariate complex problems, but it requires low verbal intelligence and a feminine temperament to buy into it. Back in February, Peterson had assisted in a study where I think his postgrad students were looking at this phenomenon. So the study was completed at the University of Toronto. I will provide you with a link at the Psych Lab, indicated that verbal intelligence and politically correct beliefs were correlated at more than minus 0.4. It's a huge effect. And it's also coordinated with having a feminine temperament, not just with being feminine, but with having a feminine temperament. So if you're a hammer, everything becomes a nail. I posted something to Facebook this morning, and no sooner had I posted it than I began to see newspaper articles confirming what I knew to be true. But my buddy Gary Tate, who's a big rockabilly promoter, he has a radio show that promotes rockabilly music, really fantastic old music from the 50s and early 60s. Gary Tate stated that the Hegelian dialecticalism has been married to Islamist radicalism through the stolid efforts of postmodernists and the woke doctrine of intersectionality. I'm no sooner reminded, my friends on Facebook, that the ideologies descended from dialectical synthesis have resulted in creating death cults that I was offered further proof. So we can see in black and white the origins of these toxic beliefs, which are our own universities. Jamie Sarkanak just published an article to Postmedia entitled "Canadian Academics Shrug at Horrendous Violence Perpetrated Against Israelis." I provided the link to that article. A toxic idea has infatuated academics in Canada and the rest of the world. Decolonialization. The movement classifies people into two groups, settlers and indigenous groups. Any people deemed indigenous to a region are entitled to their claimed lands and have moral authority to resist so-called occupation. Settlers, those deemed to be illegitimate occupiers, are morally reprehensible and deserve to face whatever indigenous resistance comes their way. So here we see the replacement of the dialectical materialism of Marx and Engels with the new dialectical synthesis of intersectional victim groups versus patriarchal society. Jewish people are considered settlers in Israel by the decolonization movement, despite having lived in the region for thousands of years. Every single festival in Christianity that we celebrate has its origins in the Holy Land. No other people are so entitled to be there than those that traditionally lived there. So when Israel suffered a barbaric attack by the Palestinian terror group Hamas last weekend, the gruesome details of which reportedly included the rape of young women, the execution of elderly Jews, the burning of bodies, the beheading of infants, and the massacre of people attending a music festival, some Canadian academics seem to shrug. The reason they've shrugged is that they are poisoning the minds of our youth with anti-Christian, toxic ideology at the taxpayer's expense. And all political parties in Canada are responsible for this, for a deconstruction of our history. I'm so sick and tired of hearing them apologizing for the fact that I live on Anishinaabe ground. And I am not disrespecting the Anishinaabe because I've been adopted by the grannies in Cape Croker. The fact remains, however, that we have to stop tribalism if we were ever to build a nation built on common values. And the only values that have ever worked are Christian ethics, epistemology, and ontology. These are things to think and pray about as we pray for Israel and pray for the holy city to be reestablished as a praise in the earth. Because if you know, if Israel is under attack from these demonic forces, that there's a great war waging in heaven against the church. The church is being infected by these perverted and